Eugene Alden Hackman was born on January 30th, 1930, in San Bernardino, California, the eldest of two boys in a family that never had two nickels to rub together. His father, Eugene Sr., was a line-type operator for the local newspaper who drank more than he worked. His mother, Lydia, was a waitress who dreamed of Hollywood and died of burns from a cigarette fire when Gene was 13. After that, the family shattered. Gene and his younger brother Richard were bounced between relatives in Danville, Illinois, where their grandmother Anna ran a boarding house full of drifters and broken dreams. Gene grew up big, angry, and already sporting the scowl and gravel voice that would later terrify audiences. At Danville High, he was a loner who boxed, played hooky, and got expelled twice for fighting. By 16, he was 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, and done with everything. On July 30th, 1946, 6 months after turning 16, he forged his birth certificate, added 4 years to his age, and walked into the Marine Corps recruiting station on Vermilion Street. The sergeant looked at the tall, baby-faced kid and asked for ID. Gene slid the fake papers across the desk. The sergeant shrugged and said, "Welcome to the Corps, son." They shipped him to Paris Island on a troop train full of 17 and 18-year-olds who thought they were men. Gene was still growing into his boots. Boot camp tried to break him. Midnight marches, live fire drills, sergeants screaming in his face. He never flinched. He graduated as a private first class and was sent to Cherry Point, North Carolina for radio school, then to San Diego, and finally, in 1947, to China with the 1st Marine Division as part of the post-war occupation force guarding the railroads around Tianjin and Qingdao. He was 17 years old, in a country that hated Americans, guarding trains full of refugees while communist guerrillas blew up tracks every night. He learned to sleep with a .45 under his pillow, to strip a bar blindfolded, and to hate officers who gave stupid orders. He went AWOL 3 times, once for a week in Shanghai, drinking rice wine and chasing Chinese girls. Each time he was caught, thrown in the brig, and busted back to private. By 1949, he was a private with 3 courts-martials, a reputation as the toughest kid in the battalion, and a permanent distrust of authority that would serve him well in Hollywood. He discharged in 1951 at 21 with the National Defense Service Medal, the China Service Medal, and a dishonorable discharge he later got upgraded to honorable. He came home with $400, a duffel bag, and a face that looked like it had already lived 3 lifetimes. He drifted, odd jobs, dishwashing, sleeping in cars. He used the GI Bill to study journalism and television at the University of Illinois, then dropped out and moved to New York. He lied again, this time about his age in the opposite direction to get into the Pasadena Playhouse. He was 30 years old, broke, and sharing a 1-room apartment with Dustin Hoffman, who was 22 and thought Gene was the coolest guy alive. Gene Hackman spent 4 years being told he was too old, too ugly, and too angry for movies. He spent 4 years proving them wrong, one audition at a time. Every time he narrowed those eyes and growled a line, he was still the 16-year-old runaway who had lied his way into the Marines and learned the hard way that the world doesn't care how old you are if you're willing to bleed for it.
In the spring of 1947, 17-year-old Private Gene Hackman stepped off a troop ship in Qingdao, China, with the 1st Marine Division. The war was over, but the country was tearing itself apart. The nationalists and communists were slaughtering each other, and the Marines were stuck in the middle, guarding railroads, coal mines, and airfields, while both sides tried to kill him. Gene's unit was part of Marine Air Group 24, but he wasn't flying. He was a radio operator and guard, living in a Quonset hut that smelled of coal smoke and fear. His job was to ride the daily train from Tianjin to Beijing, a 90-mile run through bandit country, making sure it didn't get blown up. Every morning, he climbed aboard with a Thompson submachine gun, a .45 on his hip, and a hangover from the night before. The trains were packed with refugees, Chinese soldiers, and American Marines who knew the tracks could be gone any minute. One night outside Tangshan, the train was ambushed. Chinese guerrillas opened up with machine guns and mortars. Gene was in the last car. He kicked out a window, set up his Thompson on the sill, and emptied magazine after magazine into the darkness. The attack lasted 12 minutes. When it was over, 3 Marines were dead, 8 wounded, and Gene had a piece of shrapnel in his calf he never reported. The next day, he went AWOL to a Shanghai brothel and stayed drunk for 5 days. When he came back, he was thrown in the brig for 30 days on bread and water. That was court-martial number 1. He got out, went right back to the trains, and learned to hate officers who sat in warm offices while 17-year-old kids died on frozen tracks. In 1948, he was busted again for punching a second lieutenant who called him white trash. Court-martial number 2. 30 more days in the break. In 1949, he went AWOL a third time, this time to Qingdao, where he got tattooed, fought in underground boxing matches, and won $200 betting on himself. When the MPs dragged him back, he spent 60 days in the stockade and was busted to private for the 4th time. He learned 3 things in China. Authority is usually wrong. The only person you can trust is the guy bleeding next to you. If you're gonna fight, fight dirty and fight to win. He shipped home in 1950, discharged with a Good Conduct Medal, irony noted, 3 court-martials on his record, and a permanent distrust of anyone in a tie. He was 20, spoke fluent barroom Chinese, and had a face that looked like it had been carved with a bayonet. He drifted for years, washed dishes in New York, sold shoes, drove a truck, anything to eat. At 30, he walked into the Pasadena Playhouse and lied again, this time saying he was 25. They took him anyway. He shared a room with Dustin Hoffman, who was 22, and called Gene the old man. Gene taught Dustin how to throw a punch. Dustin taught Gene how to cry on cue. Gene Hackman spent 4 years being the angriest kid in China, learning that rules are for people who don't have to survive. Every time he snarled on screen, every time he stared down a camera like it owed him money, he was still that 17-year-old private on a frozen train in 1947, shooting into the dark and daring the world to try him again.
Gene Hackman came home from the Marines in 1951 with 3 courts-martial, a scarred calf, and $187 in his pocket. He was 21 going on 40, spoke like gravel soaked in bourbon, and trusted exactly no one. He washed dishes in Howard Johnson's, drove a Pepsi truck in New Jersey, sold shoes in Manhattan, and slept in Central Park when the rent ran out. At 30, he was broke, divorced, he had married a bank teller in 1956 and it lasted 5 minutes, and living in a $35 a month cold water flat in Greenwich Village with Dustin Hoffman and Robert Duvall. He lied again, this time about his age downward, to get into the Pasadena Playhouse on the GI Bill. The instructors took one look at the battered face and said, "You're too old and too ugly for leading man parts." Gene said, "Good, I don't want to be pretty." They cast him as heavies, killers, and cops. He graduated in 1958, moved back to New York, and started pounding pavement on Broadway with Hoffman and Duvall. They were the 3 poorest actors in town, sharing one overcoat between them in winter. He got tiny parts off Broadway, then a role in The Premise, an improv show where he played a racist cop so convincingly that audiences booed him off stage. Warren Beatty saw it and recommended him for Lilith, 1964. Gene's first big film role was Buck Barrow in Bonnie and Clyde, 1967. He was 37, playing a man 20 years younger, and stole every scene he was in. The studio wanted to cut his part. Warren Beatty threatened to walk if they did. The film made $70 million and earned Gene his first Oscar nomination. Then came The French Connection, 1971. Director William Friedkin wanted an unknown for Popeye Doyle. Gene auditioned in a rumpled raincoat, unshaven, and read the interrogation scene like he was still in a Chinese train yard daring someone to lie to him. Friedkin hired him on the spot.
Gene won the Oscar for Best Actor, beating out George C. Scott and Peter O'Toole. On stage, he thanked the Marines who taught me discipline, and nobody in the audience understood what he meant. He made 40 more films: The Conversation, Superman as Lex Luthor, Hoosiers, Unforgiven, The Royal Tenenbaums. He won a second Oscar for Unforgiven, directed by his old swimming pool digging buddy Clint Eastwood. He never smiled for the cameras, never did talk shows, never explained the limp or the scars. He just showed up, growled his lines, and left. He married twice more, had 3 children, wrote novels, painted, and retired in 2004 after a heart scare. He died of heart failure on January 18, 2023, at age 92 in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Gene Hackman spent 4 years being the angriest kid in the Marines, learning that the world doesn't reward nice. He spent 50 years proving that anger, when channeled, is the most powerful acting tool on earth. Every time he narrowed those eyes and spat a line like it tasted bad, he was still the 16-year-old runaway who had lied his way into hell and come out the other side ready to take on Hollywood the only way he knew how, by refusing to lose.
Morgan Porterfield Freeman Jr. was born on June 1, 1937, in Memphis, Tennessee. The youngest of 5 children in a family so poor they sometimes lived with relatives and sometimes in rented rooms above bars. His father, Morgan Sr., was a barber who drank himself to death when Morgan was 6. His mother, Mame Edna, cleaned houses and took in laundry. Morgan spent chunks of his childhood with his grandmother in Charleston, Mississippi, where he discovered 2 things that would define his life: the magic of storytelling on the front porch and the sound of his own voice echoing in the Baptist church. At 12 years old, he won a statewide drama competition and was offered a partial scholarship to the drama school at Jackson State. By 15, he was already 6 feet 2, quiet, watchful, and speaking with that calm, deep voice that made people stop talking and listen. When he graduated Greenwood High in 1955, he turned down the scholarship. He wanted something bigger than acting. He wanted to fly. He enlisted in the United States Air Force in September 1955 at 18, tested off the charts in mechanical aptitude and radio operation, and was sent to Lackland AFB, then Keesler AFB for radar school. By 1956, Airman Basic Freeman was a radar technician with the 1949th Airways and Air Communications Service at March Air Force Base, California, tracking Soviet long-range bombers during the coldest years of the Cold War. His job was to sit in a darkened room, headphones on, watching green blips on a scope that could be Tu-95 Bears carrying hydrogen bombs toward the West Coast. He learned to read weather, identify aircraft by radar signature, and speak in the calm, precise cadence that would one day narrate March of the Penguins and calm entire nations. He rose to Airman First Class, earned the Air Force Good Conduct Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, and the opportunity to cross-train as a fighter pilot. He turned it down. After 4 years of staring at blips that could end the world, he realized he didn't want to be the one pulling the trigger. He wanted to be the voice that told the story after the fact. He left the Air Force in 1959 at age 22 with an honorable discharge and a voice that had been trained to stay calm when the world was ending. He moved to Los Angeles, worked as a clerk at LA City College, took acting classes at night, and spent the 1960s in off-Broadway obscurity, driving taxis and living on $35 a week. He broke through at 34 with the children's show The Electric Company, then at 50 with Street Smart, Oscar nomination, Driving Miss Daisy, Glory, The Shawshank Redemption, $1 Million Baby, Oscar win, The Dark Knight trilogy, and the voice that narrated everything from war documentaries to Penguin movies. He flew his own planes, owned a ranch in Mississippi, and never forgot the 4 years he spent tracking the end of the world. When asked why he turned down pilot training, he said, "I realized I didn't want to be the man who dropped the bomb. I wanted to be the man who could talk you down from the ledge afterward."
Morgan Freeman spent 4 years making sure the world didn't end, then spent 60 years giving the world the calmest, wisest, most reassuring voice it has ever known. Every time that voice says, "Hope is a good thing," he's still the 20-year-old airman in a dark room, watching blips on a screen and keeping civilization alive one radar sweep at a time.
In the summer of 1956, 19-year-old Airman Basic Morgan Freeman arrived at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi for radar maintenance school. He was 6'2", quiet, and already spoke like God warming up. The instructors took one look at the tall black kid from Memphis and expected trouble. They got the best student in the class instead. He finished top of his course and was sent to the 1949th Airways and Air Communications Service at March Air Force Base, California. His new home was a cinder block building with no windows, air thick with cigarette smoke, and the smell of hot vacuum tubes. He sat in front of a massive AN FPS-3 search radar scope 12 hours a day, headphones clamped to his skull, tracking everything that flew over the Pacific. This was the height of the Cold War. Soviet Tu-95 Bears flew daily toward Alaska, testing American reaction times. SAC bombers practiced nuclear runs. Morgan's voice became the calm in the storm. When a blip appeared that might be a bomber with an H-bomb, he didn't shout. He spoke slowly, clearly, precisely. Unidentified track, bearing 270, range 400 miles, altitude 35,000, speed 490 knots, request intercept. Fighter pilots on alert at George AFB and Castle AFB scrambled on his word. He guided them in, talked them onto the target, and brought them home. He learned to keep his voice level when the world might end in 20 minutes. He learned that panic kills faster than missiles. He worked the graveyard shift, midnight to noon, drinking coffee black and smoking Lucky Strikes. Between alerts, he read Shakespeare and James Baldwin aloud to himself, perfecting the cadence that would one day narrate the March of the Penguins and calm entire nations. When a nervous controller started breathing too fast, Morgan would lean over and say, "Breathe with me, son. In 4, hold 4, out 4. We got this." The room would settle. In 1958, he was promoted to Airman First Class and offered a chance to cross-train as a fighter pilot. He turned it down. After 4 years of watching blips that could erase cities, he decided he didn't want to be the finger on the trigger. He wanted to be the voice that kept the finger steady. He left the Air Force in May 1959 with an honorable discharge, the National Defense Service Medal, the Air Force Good Conduct Medal, and a voice that had been forged in the hottest part of the Cold War. He moved to Los Angeles, worked as a transcript typist at LA City College, and took night classes at the Pasadena Playhouse. For the next 25 years, he paid dues in dinner theater and soap operas, always the calm center of every storm. When he finally broke through at 50 with Street Smart, critics wrote, "He has the most reassuring voice in cinema." They had no idea that voice had once kept the world from ending one radar sweep at a time. Morgan Freeman spent 4 years making sure civilization didn't die in fire, then spent 60 years giving the world the calmest, wisest, most trustworthy voice it has ever known. Every time that voice says, "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things," he's still the 21-year-old airman in a dark room, keeping the planet safe one steady breath at a time.
Morgan Freeman walked out of the Air Force in May 1959 with a duffel bag, a Good Conduct Medal, and a voice that could stop panic in its tracks. He was 22, broke, and carrying the weight of 4 years spent watching blips that could have ended the world.
He moved to Los Angeles, got a $63 a week job as a clerk typist at Los Angeles City College, and started taking night acting classes at the Pasadena Playhouse. For the next 25 years, he paid dues the hard way. He danced in the chorus of the 1964 World's Fair production of Ello Dolly, drove a taxi in Harlem, and lived on $35 a week while doing off-Broadway and soap operas. He was easy reader on the Electric Company for 6 seasons, teaching millions of kids to read with the same calm cadence he once used to guide F-86s onto Soviet bears. Critics didn't notice him. Casting directors typecast him as wise old black men, even though he was barely 40. Then, in 1987, at age 50, everything changed. He played Fast Black, a vicious pimp in Street Smart. Critics woke up. The New York Times wrote, "Morgan Freeman's performance is so real, it hurts to watch." He earned his first Oscar nomination. 2 years later, Driving Miss Daisy made him a household name. Glory, 1989, showed he could break your heart. The Shawshank Redemption, 1994, made him the moral center of the greatest prison film ever made. $1 Million Baby, 2004, finally won him the Oscar at 67. Directors discovered what the Air Force had known since 1956. When Morgan Freeman speaks, people listen. When he narrates, nations lean in. March of the Penguins, the Dark Knight trilogy, every war documentary worth watching, every calm voiceover that ever steadied a frightened audience, it all came from the same place, the Radar Shack at March AFB, where he learned that a calm voice can keep the world from ending. He flew his own planes, bought a yacht he sailed solo across the Atlantic, and at 70 opened a blues club in Clarksdale, Mississippi, because the Air Force taught me rhythm too. He became the voice of God in Bruce Almighty and Evan Almighty because, frankly, nobody else sounded more like God. He married twice, had 4 children, and never forgot the 4 years he spent making sure civilization didn't die in fire. When asked why his voice is so reassuring, he smiles and says, "Because I practiced keeping people calm when the alternative was the end of everything." Morgan Freeman spent 4 years making sure the world didn't end, then spent 60 years giving the world the calmest, wisest, most trustworthy voice it has ever known. Every time that voice says, "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things," he's still the 22-year-old airman who once kept the planet safe, one steady breath at a time.
Carlos Ray Norris Jr. was born on March 10, 1940, in Ryan, Oklahoma, the eldest of 3 boys in a family that had nothing but pride and problems. His father, Ray, was a half-Cherokee mechanic and alcoholic who disappeared for months at a time. His mother, Wilma, was an Irish-German seamstress who raised boys on welfare and prayer. They called Carlos Charlie because he was shy, skinny, and wore thick glasses. At 10, the family moved to Torrance, California. Charlie was the quiet kid who got beaten up at school, hid in the library, and dreamed of being anybody else. He graduated Torrance High in 1958 with no plans, no money, and no confidence. The Air Force recruiter promised steady meals and a uniform. On August 28, 1958, 18-year-old Airman Basic Carlos Ray Norris raised his right hand at Lackland AFB, Texas. They sent him to MP school at Camp Gordon, Georgia, then straight to Osan Air Base, South Korea, in 1959. He was 5'10", 140 pounds, and terrified. His first assignment was guarding the perimeter fence at Osan, a lonely post in the middle of rice paddies where North Korean infiltrators sometimes crossed. One night, he heard rustling in the wire. He chambered around in his M1 carbine, heart hammering, and almost shot a stray dog. The other MPs laughed for weeks. They called him Gomer, after Gomer Pyle. Charlie Norris decided he never wanted to be that scared again. He discovered the base judo club.
The instructor was a Korean master named Shin Ja-chol, a direct student of Tang So-do founder Hwang Ki. Shin took one look at the shy American with the thick glasses and said, "You have long arms, good for kicking." For the next 18 months, Charlie trained 6 hours a day, every day. He broke boards, sparred until he bled, and learned to move like water and strike like lightning. He earned his black belt in Tang So-do in 1960 and his black belt in judo the same year. He started teaching the other MPs and beating every Korean instructor who challenged him. He came home in 1962 as Airman First Class with the Air Force Good Conduct Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, the Korean Service Medal, and a new name the Koreans had given him, Chuck Norris, or Chuck Norris. He was discharged at March AFB, California, still shy, still quiet, but now carrying a confidence nobody could touch. He used the GI Bill to study business, worked as a karate instructor in Torrance, and opened his first dojo in 1964. He taught Steve McQueen, Priscilla Presley, and half of Hollywood. He won the professional middleweight karate champion title 6 years straight, 1968 to 1974, fought in the first televised full-contact karate matches, and became the most famous martial artist in America. He made his film debut in The Wrecking Crew, 1969, as a stuntman who fought Bruce Lee. Bruce told him, "You have power, use it." He starred in Way of the Dragon, 1972, losing to Bruce Lee in the Coliseum in one of the greatest fight scenes ever filmed. He made Good Guys Wear Black, The Octagon, Lone Wolf McQuade, and then Missing in Action, 1984, becoming the biggest action star of the 1980s. He created Walker, Texas Ranger, and ran it for 8 seasons, kicking bad guys and preaching family values to 20 million viewers a week. He married twice, had 3 children, became a born-again Christian, wrote best-selling books, and, at 85, still teaches martial arts and posts memes that make the internet tremble. He kept his Air Force dog tags on his keychain his entire life. Chuck Norris spent 18 months as the shyest, skinniest MP in Korea, then spent 60 years proving that the quietest kids can become the toughest legends. Every time he delivered a roundhouse kick on screen, every time he stared down a villain without blinking, he was still that scared 18-year-old on the Osan perimeter fence who decided fear was a choice and he wasn't choosing it anymore.
Chuck Norris came home from Korea in August 1962 as Airman First Class Carlos Ray Norris, still shy, still wearing thick glasses, but now carrying 2 black belts and a confidence that made people step aside when he walked into a room. He was 22, married to his high school sweetheart Diane Holchek, and living in a tiny apartment in Torrance, California, on $178 a month separation pay. He took a job at Northrop Aviation as a sheet metal worker, but his heart was already in the dojo. He opened his first karate school in 1964 in a 20 by 40 foot storefront on Hawthorne Boulevard with borrowed mats and a $500 loan from a student. He charged $10 a month. Students trickled in: housewives, teenagers, off-duty cops. Chuck taught Tang So-do the Korean way: hard, fast, no excuses. He sparred full contact, no pads, and never pulled punches. Within a year, the school was packed. By 1966, he had 3 dojos and was teaching Steve McQueen, Chad McQueen, Bob Barker, and Priscilla Presley. He started competing in 1965. His first tournament was the Winter Nationals in Long Beach. He was nervous, still wearing the same thick glasses. He fought Joe Louis in the finals and lost by decision. Joe Louis later said, "I knew that night I had just fought the toughest man I would ever meet." Chuck never lost again for 6 straight years. From 1966 to 1974, he won every major karate title in America. Grand champion at the All-American Karate Championships, 1966 to 1971, professional middleweight world champion, 1968 to 1974, undefeated, Fighter of the Year, Black Belt Magazine, 1969.
He fought full contact when it was still illegal in most states, broke boards with his fists, and became the first Westerner ever awarded an 8th-degree black belt grandmaster in Taekwondo by the Korean masters themselves. He ran his schools like Marine boot camp, push-ups for talking, running laps for being late. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. One look from those calm eyes, and you dropped and gave him 20. He produced dozens of national champions, including Howard Jackson, Bob Burbage, and a skinny kid named Steve McQueen, who once said, "Chuck Norris is the only man I've ever been afraid to spar with." Off the mat, he was still shy. He spoke softly, blushed when praised, and hated crowds. On the mat, he was a different animal. Lightning fast, brutally precise, and absolutely merciless. Bar fights became legend. In 1968, a drunk Marine challenged him in a Torrance bar. Chuck put him down with one spinning back kick and walked away before the guy hit the floor. The story grew. By the time it reached the newspapers, the Marine was 6'8" and Chuck had killed him. Chuck never corrected it. He started making movies in 1969 as a stuntman and fight choreographer. Bruce Lee saw him fight at the Long Beach Internationals and said, "You have power. Come to Hong Kong." In 1972, they filmed the Coliseum fight in Way of the Dragon. Bruce won on screen, but off camera he told friends, "Chuck is the only man who could really beat me." Chuck Norris spent the 1960s turning the shyest kid in the Air Force into the most feared martial artist in America. Every time he stepped on a mat, every time he broke a board or dropped a challenger, he was still the skinny 18-year-old on the Osan fence who had decided fear was a choice, and he was done choosing it.
By 1974, Chuck Norris was 34, undefeated world karate champion for 6 straight years, owner of 32 dojos, and making $250,000 a year teaching movie stars how to kick. He had fought Bruce Lee on screen, taught Steve McQueen how to look tough, and turned Tang Soo Do into a household name. Hollywood kept offering him villain roles, big dumb muscle. Chuck kept turning them down. He wanted to be the hero. In 1977, a low-budget film called Breaker Breaker needed a trucker who could fight. Chuck took the lead for $10,000 and a percentage. It made $18 million. Suddenly, every producer in town wanted the karate guy. He made Good Guys Wear Black, 1978, A Force of One, 1979, The Octagon, 1980, and Lone Wolf McQuade, 1983. Critics hated him. Audiences loved him. He was now the highest-paid action star after Schwarzenegger, making $500,000 a picture plus points. In 1984, Cannon Films offered him Missing in Action, a Vietnam rescue fantasy. Chuck read the script, hated the politics, but loved the paycheck, $1.5 million plus gross. The movie made $18 million and spawned 2 sequels. He became the face of 1980s macho cinema, beard, jeans, cowboy hat, and a roundhouse kick that could stop a tank. He kept directing his own stunts, breaking ribs, tearing ligaments, and refusing doubles. At 44, he was still faster than men half his age. He turned down Die Hard because he didn't want to play a German terrorist. He turned down Romancing the Stone because he didn't want to be second fiddle to Michael Douglas. He waited. In 1993, CBS offered him a television series, a modern Texas Ranger who fought crime with martial arts and family values. They wanted to call it Walker, Texas Ranger. Chuck said yes on one condition. He would have creative control and the show would be filmed in Texas. For 8 seasons and 203 episodes, he was Cordell Walker, quiet, moral, unbeatable. The show averaged 18 million viewers a week, ran in 100 countries, and made Chuck the most recognizable action star on the planet. He produced, directed episodes, wrote the theme song, and insisted on positive messages. No swearing, no drugs, no sex, just justice. Critics called it corny,
Fans called it Saturday night. Teenagers in Brazil learned English from Walker reruns. Grandmothers in Germany sent him cookies. He retired the badge in 2001 at age 61, wrote best-selling books, The Secret of Inner Strength, Black Belt Patriotism, became a born-again Christian, and turned his fame into a force for good. Kickstart Kids Foundation, teaching martial arts to at-risk children in Texas public schools. He married Gina O'Kelly in 1998, had twins at 61, and at 85 still posts daily workouts on Instagram that shame men 40 years younger. He is the only man alive who has been both a world karate champion and a Texas Ranger. Honorary, but still. Chuck Norris spent 18 months as the shyest MP in Korea, then spent 60 years proving that the quietest kids can become the loudest legends. Every time he delivered a roundhouse kick on screen, every time he stared down evil with those calm eyes, he was still the 18-year-old on the Osan fence who decided fear was a choice, and he was done choosing it. Walker, Texas Ranger, wasn't acting. It was Chuck finally getting to be the hero he had always been.
This is the final chapter, the one we save for the end of every triple feature. No battles, no explosions, just respect. Gene Hackman was 16 when he lied his way into the Marines. He spent 4 years in China, guarding trains that never stopped getting shot at, got court-martialed 3 times for refusing to bow, and came home with scars inside and out that never healed. He gave us Popeye Doyle, Lex Luthor, Little Bill Daggett, and every angry, honest man who ever told the truth when it hurt. He never asked for parades. He just asked the world to look in the mirror and not flinch. Thank you for your service, Gene Hackman. Morgan Freeman was 18 when he turned down a full drama scholarship to Juilliard because he wanted to serve something bigger than himself. He spent 4 years in a dark radar shack, making sure Soviet bombers never reached American soil, learning to speak so calmly that entire fighter squadrons breathed with him. He gave us Red in Shawshank, God in 2 comedies, and the voice that has narrated hope for 3 generations. He never raised his voice once in uniform, and he never needed to again. Thank you for your service, Morgan Freeman. Chuck Norris was 18 when he arrived at Osan Air Base, the shyest, skinniest MP in Korea. 18 months later, he left with 2 black belts and a quiet certainty that fear was a choice. He gave us 6 undefeated world karate titles, Walker Texas Ranger, and the most imitated roundhouse kick in history. He taught millions of kids that real strength isn't loud. It's the decision you make when nobody's watching. Thank you for your service, Chuck Norris. 3 men from 3 different wars, 3 different branches, 3 different lives. One was a runaway who learned to fight dirty. One was a dreamer who kept the world from ending with his voice. One was a shy kid who decided fear was optional. They never met on a battlefield. They never stood in the same formation, but they wore the same cloth, bled the same colors, and carried the same quiet pride that only comes from knowing you once stood watch so the rest of us could sleep. Gene, Morgan, Chuck, you gave us more than movies and television. You gave us proof that ordinary kids from broken homes can become extraordinary men when their country asks. You gave us characters we believed in because we knew somewhere deep down that the toughness wasn't acting. So from every viewer who ever felt braver because Popeye Doyle didn't blink, from every child who fell asleep to Morgan Freeman's voice and believed tomorrow would be okay, from every kid who put on a white hat and pretended to be Walker because someone had to stand for what's right, thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for showing us that real heroes don't wear capes, they wear dog tags,
and sometimes they wear them for the rest of their lives. This is Hollywood Heroes. We don't just tell their stories. We remember who they were before the lights came on. Gene Hackman, Morgan Freeman, Chuck Norris, we salute you, and we will never forget.